You made it to the Go Commando Show with Fred Galvin. On our new mission, we contend with the naked truths of health, leadership, and overcoming adversity. Now it's time to Go Commando.
Good afternoon, Commandos. We have a great show for you today, and I have with me none other than Travis Gitthens. He was a platoon commander. Both of, for us, it was our final duty station in the Marine Corps, and that was in Norfolk, Virginia. There's a little-known unit in the Marine Corps called FAST, and it's Fast Company. It's not the magazine, but it's similar to like a SWAT team for the Marine Corps, where at embassies overseas or other vital national assets you have, such as like the White House, you have Marines that are protecting those assets, and overseas at those embassies, at almost all embassies, they're U.S. Marines that are there for a specific role. And if something goes into duress where there's looks like there's an imminent threat, a FAST platoon is usually the force of choice that gets called to go and reinforce those embassies. So the duty station that we were both stationed at, or I was a commanding officer, and Travis, he was a platoon commander, a captain in charge of 50 Marines and a corpsman. We were in charge of a geographic area which encompassed those areas to include the embassies or anything else that the United States of America, the Department of Defense and Department of State worked out that we need to react to, but it was for Europe and Africa. And also there was responsibilities that we had in the United States for nuclear refueling of different government assets, as well as the security of the naval station down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And so I'm going to give a little bit of brief background about Travis, but before we get started, I did want to let you know that in order to bring great guests and make it all happen, we have sponsors. And you can go on the GoCommandoShow.com website, and you can buy a nice shirt like you see here, polo. It says Go Commando, Go Commando Show. You can buy them for yourself, your family, your friends, your girlfriend, whoever. And you can also, there's other sponsors such as BPI Sports makes great supplements to include branched-chain amino acids. And that's what I use after a workout. As many of you who listen to the show realize, I had a problem with my heart because I had high cholesterol, and it became a serious problem. And as growing up as an athlete, if you eat a lot of animal byproducts, and then after a workout, you put in some muscle 2 billion and some of that big muscle builder, well, that usually comes in the form of whey protein. That's a dairy product. That's from a cow. You got to learn, if you have high blood cholesterol, you need to get tested first, but then if it's high, you need to say no way to whey protein. And what I do is I use the branched chain amino acids, and you can get that on the GoCommandoShow.com. Click on there. I build the website so there's no security risk of somebody stealing your data, because I create and control the whole website. But using BPI Sports or Amazon, any of the sponsors, Entirely Pets, that helps us bring you great guests and bring you great information. So without any further time spent on that, I want to talk a little bit about Travis's background. And he did join the Marine Corps, and he served in two duty stations. One was out in Camp Pendleton, California, with the 1st Marine Division. He was a platoon commander for an extended tour with 3rd Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion, where he served as a platoon commander in combat in Iraq. And then he volunteered upon his return to do what we call as an embedded training team. So he was training some Afghan National Police to defend their own country in Afghanistan, and he did that in the Helmand province in 2010, which was a very tough and very kinetic time. We had a mass surge of forces into Afghanistan at that time. And then he decided to remain and stayed on with as a combat replacement as a platoon commander And very few people have that type of opportunity as a platoon commander to basically do three combat deployments. So on his second deployment to Afghanistan, which was to Afghanistan, he extended over there and just didn't go home, and he stayed over there for 2 back-to-back deployments. His second one being with an infantry battalion, the 3rd Battalion, the 5th Marine Corps Regiment, and they were based in Sangin, northern Sangin, which was at that time in 2010, it was very, very, very kinetic, and that battalion took a high casualty toll. It was, and the unit I was with came in, and we actually, in 2011, did a relief in place in that same area in Sangin Valley, just north of where 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines was. So, we have some of the same experiences. And then later on in 2012, we ended up being stationed in Norfolk, Virginia at FAST, where I was a commanding officer and he was a platoon commander, and he had a platoon of Marines, went down, did a deployment, provided the security on Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and then did a very intense workup, trained for all the mission essential tasks that we have, and deployed over into Spain, and was there in case anything should go on in anywhere in Europe or Africa for any vital national or naval assets. So it could have been an embassy, it could have been like the USS Cole that had to pull into a port where FAST had gone in and provided security in instances like that. It's a kind of a multiple purpose force that if something goes wrong, FAST is immediately on the scene. We kind of have that is our bread and butter, to immediately respond, and we get these nice little aviation assets to move around the theater. And he had great training opportunities to work with the Spanish, the Greeks, and the Israelis. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those topics and about his background, things before he got in the Marine Corps that I wasn't totally tuned in on. He is from Wyoming, so we're going to talk about some of those things that are near and dear to his heart. And growing up here in Kansas, we have the American Royal Rodeo, which is a proud tradition of over 100 years here in the Midwest. It's a very large professional rodeo, and the American Royal does a lot of other events, which he is down here to support right now. They do some events with education of agricultural education and they provide scholarships to students. And that was a subject which we addressed early on in one of our early podcasts with Lynn Parman, the president and CEO she's the very first female CEO of the American Royal Rodeo. So you can go back and you can listen to her very inspirational podcast. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the rodeo, but Travis, you grew up in Wyoming, and tell us a little bit about how you grew up and what led you to eventually join the Marine Corps.
Yeah, so I grew up on a ranch. It was a cattle ranch with horses and all, and my dad and my brother were both ropers. I didn't want to be a roper. I wanted to ride bulls. So that's what I wanted to do into my teen years. Parents, very wisely so, dissuaded me from doing that. And so when that went off the table, I said, okay, I want to be a Marine. And so went right from that to the other. And I've always asked my mom, what do you rather me do? Would you rather be gone to the Marine Corps or ride bulls? And she still thinks that Marine Corps was probably the better the choice. I think so too. So yeah.
Well, and we got some footage from American Royal Rodeo. We'll go through some of that here in a second. But if you're a cowboy, and our grandfather, he was a cowboy. When this area was really big into the stockyards and slaughterhouses to treat the beef, and that's a lot of people don't know what a cowboy is or why, the background of it. They think that, and even with the rodeo, they think that it's that's just something outdated kind of. But the reason we had cowboys was to herd cattle, and that was that was a staple in the American diet. And the cowboys were there to basically make sure those steer, the cattle were contained on a certain property, so that at the proper time they could slaughter the animals and sell, or sell and then slaughter it. But they did have a purpose, and the rodeo became a lot of people don't realize that was America's very first sport.
Yeah.
And it sounds to some like it may be, a silly, but it is a sport. And we're going to look at some footage of like what both men and women do. And they did it kind of just sort of like in the Marines when we're overseas. There's some crazy things you do just because you don't have a lot of other resources.
Tests of skill and speed.
Yeah.
Both for the individual, the cowboy, their skill, and then also the skill of the animal.
Yes.
They take a lot of pride in their horses and the ability of the horses. And as we'll see in your footage, a lot of it is things that still happen today. People have to rope and doctor cattle right in the middle of the pasture and or break horses to ride. And so anytime you get two people together, there's going to be a competition.
Yes.
And so they turned it into sport.
Yes. And, being a cowboy today is, there's two general things they can do. They can do it for work, which is still done. The cowboys out there working on the property, not so much today in the same way it used to be, but then there's also the athlete, the competitor.
Yep.
And I mean, it's a tough, either way you do it, it's tough being out there exposed to elements. A day like this is windy, rainy, and chilly. It's not always so much fun, but there's to be a professional cowboy. They're out there practicing, and like we'll see here in some of this footage, some of these professional cowboys. I mean, they're out there 7 days a week, often several hours a day, and they do it from often when they're a young child, and to me that's kind of motivating and inspiring. That some people, listeners, think that to do something great, you may have seen some of the recent Star Wars movies where, somebody just picks up a lightsaber and they're a Jedi. They don't have to go through what Luke Skywalker did years or decades ago. But, these cowboys, just like any professional.
Yeah, they're professional athletes.
It takes years and, the hours, it's not something that you get good at overnight. And then there's a high cost in your body that, all these guys, the harder they ride, like the bull riders especially, you don't see many bull riders in their 30s.
Over 30, yeah. A 30-year-old bull rider is an old bull rider.
Yeah. They talk about it, and we'll see and hear some of this very humbly. They say, you talk to them, it's very different than, say, like a professional football or basketball player. These guys are all banged up, and you have a bull stomping on them or a bronco, and they just talk about it like it's nothing, and they say, I haven't had anything serious. Just I broke a back and got some stuff fused in my neck. But
it's not a matter of if you get injured, it's when and how bad.
Right.
And then most times next weekend or the next day, they get right back on, do it again.
Yes.
Play hurt. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think long term, we can talk about that a little bit later because we do want to address Mighty Oaks, which is a charity, very, very powerfully effective charity for many veterans that have gone through, a lifetime worth of, psychological and emotional turmoil, and it's really helped. But it's, like these issues that, warriors have. It's if you mask it or cover it up or ignore it,
numb it out.
Yeah, same thing like with a cowboy. If you just get immediately right back, at that time it may seem like the thing to do, but unless there is some ability to repair it over the long term. And that's one of the things we talk about on the Go Commando show. One, we get to the naked truths by going commando. And two, it's when we talk about health, there's a lot of things that have gone on in my health, not just with cholesterol, but shoulder repairs, wrist reconstruction, just a lot of things happen in the body. When you try to hit that override button and just, default to, the mission has priority, I got to keep going. Over the long term, that's going to cause a lot of damage.
Yep. It's not sustainable.
All right.
Yep.
So before we start talking on the rodeo, now, when you joined the Marines, what was that spark in your mind from the Marine Corps versus another service, or what led you to figure out to answer your country's call and serve to begin with?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this the other day. So we're very close to Lincoln, Nebraska here, and Scott Frost was just announced to be the Cornhuskers head coach. And Scott Frost is actually the reason I think that I became a Marine.
Oh,
so
wow.
he had a high and tight haircut when
Yes.
he was a quarterback. So I went into the barber shop. I was around 14 years old, and I said, I want a Scott Frost haircut. So I got a high and tight. And my grandfather, who was a Marine, when he saw it, he said, "Oh, that's a good Marine Corps haircut."
Right.
And he would always say that. That's a good Marine Corps haircut. Well, then I started seeing Marine Corps this, Marine Corps that, Marine Corps this, Marine
Right.
Corps that. And it was just always the Marine Corps, never any other service. The Marine Corps' information operations are very good.
Yeah.
They have a very consistent marketing message. And I knew that's what I wanted to be. So, yeah, I was just thinking about that the other day. Scott Frost I can thank him for going to the Marine Corps. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And he had nothing to do with it.
No, he doesn't even know.
He
Yeah.
just had that image.
Right, yep. But it's funny how one thing leads to the other. So, yeah.
Yes. So when you got into the Marine Corps, did you immediately say, "Hey, I want to be infantry," or was that something that you decided after joining?
Yeah, so my journey into the Marine Corps took quite a while. High school, started talking to the recruiter, and he actually encouraged me to look at the officer corps. And I was like, I don't want to be an officer. I want to actually do stuff. And he's like, if you want to deploy, be an officer. You absolutely will deploy, have greater chances of deploying than anybody else. And so, and then I talked to a lot of people who had been Marines, and they all said if I could go back and do it again, I would have been an officer. Guys in the reconnaissance community, things like that. So I went to college, freshman year of college, talked to a Marine officer recruiter, and I couldn't be a Marine. I'm allergic to peanuts. And this was 2003. And I was like, oh man. So that next 4 years, I still wanted to join. In my senior year, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this again. And I had this. We were talking about moral courage and walking the straight and narrow earlier. I had a choice. I could lie and just not tell him that I had an allergy and get in there, or I could be honest about it and see what happened. And faith is a real important part of my life. And I wanted to make sure that I was doing what God had called me to do. I believe God had called me to be a Marine, but here I had this allergy.
Yes.
And I said, well, I'm going to be honest. And if this is actually God's call in my life, he's going to make it happen.
Yes.
Talked to the recruiter or the officer selection officer. He said, yep, that's a disqualifier, but go see a allergist, see a specialist, and I'll see what I can do. And through that whole course, I was able to get into the Marine Corps. And that decision carried me through some very, very dark times because I knew that God had put me there. It wasn't me who had put myself there.
Right.
And so I knew if he put me there, he was going to give me the strength to get through these other things. So, but being Marine infantry was what I had always wanted to do, and was fortunate enough to become Marine infantry and heard about LAR, light armored reconnaissance, and was fortunate enough to be given that opportunity as well.
Yes.
So I was very fortunate in my Marine Corps career. I got to do everything I really ever wanted to do. I was very fortunate.
For some that don't know about the infantry, especially the infantry officer course, and there's been some things recently in the press regarding they had the first female go through the course this past September in 2017, and they'd been trying for around 5 years unsuccessfully with over 30 candidates. These are top-notch female officers that go through, but I bring that up not to make some kind of political comment, but is, a statement that, for nearly half a decade, we tried with the best female.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult. And could you describe...
Very difficult, yeah.
Not in-depth on a 12-week course, but, similar to Ranger course, infantry officer course for the Marine Corps is it's not a course where we have slouchers there. I mean,
No, not at all.
Every day,
Yeah.
we both attended that as young second lieutenants.
Yep.
But can you describe some of the rigors of what you experienced during that?
Yeah. So the infantry officer course was everything that I wanted the Marine Corps to be. Sometimes I would get opportunities, and it kind of wasn't everything it was cracked up to be. Infantry officer course was the real deal. It was it was a kick in the teeth. So it's kind of it's really built around instilling next level knowledge about infantry tactics, But it's also the training it's a very special forces style training of you never know what's coming up next.
Right. Total
There's
uncertainty.
A lot of uncertainty. It's very, very difficult.
Test your decisions that you make as a leader.
You don't know what the standard is.
Yes.
So you don't know when if you're going hard enough, if you're going fast enough. It's just full effort the whole time, but having to make smart decisions in the midst of it. And I, to the point of when they were trying to get a female to pass, I heard in Congress, I think it was in the House of Representatives or a senator saying, well, Mr. Commandant or Joint Chiefs, why do these standards have to be so high? And because a lot of females were not being able to pass the course. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, please do not change the standard. Not because it's some male, let's beat our chest sorts of things, but from my direct experience in combat situations, I was glad that that I was trained the way I was. One instance in particular is in Sangin, doing a dismounted operation, and the night prior we'd gone down to the southern end of our operational area, which was quite a distance away from our base, and so we spent the night in another unit's area of operations, and then we on foot patrolled into the area, concluded our operation, and we were going to patrol back, get in the trucks, and drive back. Well, the locals said you can't go back that way. The Taliban has backlaid your path with IEDs. Right. They've placed bombs in the path that we'd used to walk in. So we had to, rather than what we had planned on doing, getting in trucks and driving that long distance, we had to walk through a combat zone with all our gear. We'd been up since 3 a.m, and we had to walk the rest of the day through contact back to our home base. And just the disappointment of hearing that and the pain and everything, that it was a perfect example of how we were trained, because things like that would happen. Oh yeah, you're just going to the field to truck you back. Oh, trucks aren't coming. You got to walk back.
So that training with uncertainty
and set us up for success.
Mentally tough.
Yep, mental toughness.
And I will say, those were difficult times in Afghanistan as well as when you deployed to Iraq. But if something, God forbid, would ever happen in like Korea, where it's mountainous terrain.
Oh yeah.
Very densely populated urban terrain, and our military leaders have now been talking a lot recently, especially on the special operations side, about doing operations in mega cities. It's those are no joke.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's mountainous terrain, cold weather, urban, those are areas that we cannot have people slip through the wire that are. If you make the training easier, then you're allowing people that are not as mentally, and mental is such key, because if you reduce the standard and it's easier, and you get these people to, get in there, the leaders must be mentally the toughest.
Yep.
And they must be able to be the ones that drive, especially if it's cold weather. People don't want to, get out of the little nice warm sleeping bag when it's sub-zero outside. And, if you listen to the podcast we just had with Colonel Powers recently, he talks about that. As a leader, you have to be the one that drives everybody, and there's no way in this day and age I would say, having been an infantry officer and having served for a month shy of 27 years, you have to make it tougher, because the places where we likely will go, whether that's and we have plans and treaties to defend Taiwan. So, we may be fighting in a large, densely populated city. We may be in places in North Korea that's mountainous and cold weather and, densely populated city.
Yep.
And they could be using, chemical agents. So all those things play in, and you have to be tough. So it's good to hear you say that. While you were going through the infantry officer course, they didn't lower the standard, and when you were in combat, it was.
I was thankful that it was as hard as it was. Those, you want to train your mind. You start by training your body.
Yes.
Because that's the mind gives up before the body does. So the mental toughness piece is a big piece of it. Yep.
Yes. And then moving on to. You finish those combat deployments.
Mm-hmm.
Most folks that had the opportunity that you had where you got to do 3 combat deployments, which is a rarity. Most infantry officers prior to the war were doing 1 overseas deployment, and then when the war started, they needed. We were surging forces at a very high operational tempo, so many officers got to do 2 overseas deployments. But how things time, the timing on things, as well as your volunteer spirit, you said you'd extend and just do 2 back-to-back deployments. So you actually got to do 3 operational deployments, doing different tasks in each one.
Yeah.
And in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But then you made the decision, because the typical infantry officer that would have done that amount of time in the operational forces does not go to another command where you're in charge of Marines.
Yep, another operational unit. Yeah,
it's typically to recruiting or a recruit depot where, they're doing what is one of our tasks as the large Marine Corps, is to make Marines. So there's a lot of effort spent on recruiting Marines, on training Marines, or going to some various schools.
Yeah.
But you made that decision to go to where we were both assigned to the same unit, an anti-terrorism unit at FAST. And you explained your decision, why you went there, and what that was like for you.
Yeah. So I had a company commander who had been in FAST and had heard him talk about it, and it kind of perked my ears up. But really, when I was in Afghanistan, on my first leg of my deployment, I had a staff sergeant that had just come from FAST, and he talked at length about it in the training and things like that. And staying operational was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to avoid the office like a plague. So that's really what motivated me to do it. It was an opportunity because, like you said, as an officer, your operational time with actual enlisted Marines on the ground conducting operations is very, very limited. Sometimes
especially
limited.
As a platoon commander.
Yep. Sometimes limited to one deployment.
Yes.
And so an opportunity to continue, working with junior enlisted Marines in an operational capacity was something that I jumped all over. Yep. Yeah. And really, having done so many deployments in a short amount of time helped in that discussion with the person who assigns where you're going. He allowed me a lot of kind of leeway to go where I wanted. So I chose FAST, and it worked out.
And a lot of the listeners and viewers don't understand that, some people who haven't served in the military may have the perception that every Marine is out there, in combat or out in the field training. And that's really, it's only a very small percentage that is in the infantry, and that even in the infantry that's actually in charge of, now there's various levels of units from the company and battalion and regiment, but those that are at that point of friction, at least over the last 17 years, that are doing the preponderance of, the fight against an enemy are at the platoon level. It's often not even at the company, but sometimes definitely there's company, and in other instances, larger units, battalion is in a fight, but it's usually at what we were just talking about, where there is a platoon commander in charge of a platoon, and they may send out some squads, but it's usually that platoon is the one that's actually involved directly either in the fight or running an operations center where, different squads at a time are out on patrol and maintaining, whatever that mission is, whether it's security. So you having been able to do this basically on, 3 overseas deployments, with, an infantry battalion, and then you go to FAST and you did 2 deployments there. And not long after you got to FAST and picked up your platoon, you found yourself down in Guantanamo Bay.
Cuba, yeah.
And that's, that's kind of a shock, because you've been a platoon commander for a while, and for several years and in combat, but you pick up a platoon, and all of a sudden, within a matter of, just a few weeks, you're in another country doing an actual real world mission that cannot be compromised. How was that as far as your learning curve?
Yeah, so FAST is a very unique unique unit in that I think due to operational capacities in the war on terror, all of my platoon, with the exception of my squad leaders, were brand new Marines.
Wow.
So it was myself, a platoon sergeant who is an enlisted Marine who's been in 15 years, 3 squad leaders. They had been in the Marine Corps 3 years.
Yes.
And then I had Marines who'd been in the Marine Corps a matter of months.
Wow.
And they'd gone through their recruit training, they'd gone through School of Infantry, basic security guard course, and then they came to me.
Yes.
And so in addition to having to teach them not only infantry skills, but everything else a fast Marine has to do, chemical, biological, nuclear weapons, riot control, force protection. Now we, very shortly after getting them, we get sent to Cuba and use every opportunity for training. So even, operations are the best opportunity to learn.
Yes.
So, it was a lot of, they either stood post, and when they weren't standing post, they were training.
So I know in that movie, A Few Good Men, focused on Cuba, and that was, there was a little bit different organization, but that was the same mission.
Yep.
And they used
Fence line.
For fence line security on a naval base, where basically you have imprisoned terrorists down there, and we use it for other purposes as well. But they, these very young Marines, you talk about the strict discipline when you do the security mission there. What the requirements are, the standards, and I mean how seriously you and your platoon and your platoon sergeant drilled into their head the importance of that, because the next thing that you're going to do would be an overseas deployment for any possible contingency in in Europe or Africa. And realistically, FAST is the only unit that actually has, everywhere else in the Marine Corps you have 2-man integrity, but there's 1 man on a post.
Yep.
And if that Marine lacks the discipline, the security could be compromised by a terrorist driving a bomb through.
Right.
So what was it like when you're in Cuba with your Marines and the discipline, and how you instilled that in them?
Yeah. So the best way that I can describe that is there's I think it's a French poem or something. It's called For Want of the One Shoe Nail. So you have a horseshoe, and a horseshoe is held on by a small nail about the size of a toothpick. And so the story goes, for want of the nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the horse was lost. For want of the horse, the rider was lost. For want of the rider, the message was lost. For want of the message, the battle was lost. For want of the battle, the war was lost. So it all comes down to being brilliant at the basics, and really driving that into the Marines of it, so things like before they went on post, doing rigorous inspections, not only of their gear, but their knowledge of, hey, you're up on that post by yourself. If you don't have the gear, you can't do your job. If you don't have the knowledge and a situation arises and you don't handle it correctly, well, now you just created an international incident.
Yes.
So the being brilliant at the basics, it all comes down to those basic little things. I've heard the commander of the SEALs, he was given a commencement speech, and he said, if you want to change the world, make your bed. Get up and start doing the right thing the minute you get up. If you aren't responsible with the littlest things in your life, you're not going to be responsible with the big things. So really tried to teach the Marines why we were so detail oriented, because those details affect the greater scope of the mission. So a lot of inspections, a lot of training, a lot of drilling them on situations, on knowledge, doing drills to different things that arise. Because in Marine Corps training in general, there's a saying: the first time a Marine experiences something should not be in combat. Right. It should be experienced in training first, so that they have knowledge to go on. Yes. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about PTSD, about how things get recorded into our brain, and that can be for good or that can be for bad. So making sure that that information that's recorded in their brain that comes out when they need to act instinctually is good information and not bad information.
And I remember when I got to the command and took command of the unit, I may have sounded a little weird, and we haven't rehearsed or talked about this at all, but we got there in the summer of 2012. I did, and I'd been told that you're going to take over this unit that's in charge of Africa and Europe, the FAST platoons that deploy there. And so I'd previously been stationed overseas in Japan, in Okinawa, for 3.5 years. And I started focusing while I was in Japan on Europe and Africa, and I realized, what was going on, the serious threat, which we now see, has spread all over Africa, and it's very, very dangerous and very volatile. And I was standing up there, and I remember many times in front of the Marines telling the Marines, I'm not saying I'm a harbinger, but I saw something, I was able to see the unseen, that there was going to be something that happens.
Reading the tea leaves. Yeah.
And I started to say that in formations and talking to the platoon commanders, about, hey, we need to focus on some of these very high risks and doing what, like you were doing with the platoons, the most dangerous course of action, most likely course of action, and training on those, and trying to get the platoon commanders to understand that, we're in charge of, there's over 70 countries with embassies that we may go to, and we can't, there's an axiom in the Marine Corps that if you try to be strong everywhere, you're going to be weak everywhere. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't, we did not have time as a luxury to do an event, to train and rehearse, to go into every single type of embassy, but we picked those high risk ones. And and very shortly, I know you had just gone down to Cuba, and then the attack happened in Benghazi, and the consulate, and we had a platoon that was forward staged in Europe that many people heard on the news had changed their uniform to civilian clothes, and that happened 4 times, but and they seized, and they flew in the day after the attack in Benghazi. They flew into Tripoli, Libya, and held the regional affairs office in the American embassy for 90 days. Then we had one of your peers, captain. We actually sent him over to Sudan, be a replacement in Yemen, and he was there for nearly 5 months. So FAST is a unit that you, even as an officer, I mean, your peer, he had finished his deployments. He had done 2 deployments in the command, but we needed him to, he was flexible, and on a moment's notice, he gets sent over to Yemen, and Yemen was, really, a hot mess, if you want to call it that. It's a bad terrorist-filled place, but for those listeners out there, we have Marines all over the globe right now that are standing prepared, and your job, if we can fast forward and focus on when you were deployed, you were getting indications and warnings that some things might happen. But
Egypt, the Spring Awakening.
Yes, and it was, you were just literally a notice away.
Yeah, we were pre-positioned on Greece with aircraft loaded on a 25-minute leash, and ready to go into Cairo or anywhere else we needed to if it happened. And and
it's, I'm sure, a little bit nerve-wracking, not just for yourself, but those Marines, because there was an economy of force mission going on during that time in 2012 where we're still doing combat operations both in Iraq and Afghanistan, more so in Afghanistan at that time, but those were what we call the main efforts. So there was not a lot of forces to do a lot of these exercises around the Mediterranean. So you were tasked to do exercises, with a lot of these partner nations that we are allied with in Europe and all the way over to Israel. Yeah. And you're doing that at the same time when you may be called away during an exercise and go into something real world in Africa. How was that as a leader?
For us, it really, it was completely fine because we flew with everything we needed. When everywhere we flew, we had our ammo, we had our weapons.
Yes. So that's unique for FAST because nobody else does it like that.
Yeah. We had everything that we needed, wherever we went. So it was good. It kept the Marines sharp and on point, and kept them focused because that vision, they understood. And back to the point of being brilliant in the basics. what I didn't really understand until I got to FAST was how crucial, logistics are.
Yes.
It's so you can have a whole platoon. This is what happened with Joey in Benghazi. You had a whole platoon of Marines who were ready in 30 minutes to go anywhere in the world.
We're waiting on Department of State to coordinate with the Department of Defense.
To get aircraft to them. Yeah. And that's what they're waiting on. And then they get the aircraft. And then something as simple as what clothes do they wear when they land, civilian clothes or military.
And that's an issue that the Department of
completely
State,
outside of
the Marines were changing uniforms for whatever decision they were making.
And that's the most frustrating thing, I think, on the ground is not, sometimes it doesn't matter how well trained you are. You can only control what you can control. You can't control, who gets to tell you to go and who picks you up when you get there.
Yes.
And that was the troubling thing. Not so much things that we would be asked to do, but just how are we going to get there? Who's going to meet us when we get there?
Yes.
Who's making these decisions above us? And what information are they using to make those decisions? Yeah.
Interesting that you say, some of those people above us, because when you go down range, especially if it's an embassy, you're not dealing with somebody like you dealt with in Afghanistan, a military member or somebody that works in the Department of Defense. It's usually Department of State. And some of those, the constant theme I would hear is that some of these folks at these embassies, Department of State individuals, it's a mixed bag. Some of them may be decent, but like...
Some of them were a friend of a politician and they got a special appointment.
Political appointee. And some of them, like in the situation in Libya, they mentally had too much and they tapped out and said, I have to leave. But speaking of that particular topic of not being prepared, I know, and I'm not trying to quote verbatim, that there's something that Winston Churchill had mentioned, and I want to talk, and I'll have to paraphrase exactly what he said, but it's like, what a shame it would be if you were figuratively, destined in life to do a specific task, and then you were figuratively tapped on the shoulder to do it, and you found yourself unqualified.
Yeah. And that Parkland shooting, the police officer,
yes.
Just reading the news, what it seems, there's no truth in the news, but what it seems is he was outside of the school while the whole shooting was going on.
Yes. He didn't have his mind where. And I remember, without naming names, there was a peer of yours who checked in after you to take a job as a platoon commander at FAST, and for the listeners, FAST is not. It's not something in Delta Force or Marine Special Operations. It's a conventional unit that has a very specific mission, which is rapid response. Mm-hmm. They have specific tasks, which to include, they may have to recapture an embassy, and they're working in chaotic environments where often there is no reserve or ability to have a quick reaction force immediately reinforce you. I mean, you're kind of alone and unafraid, and I was really trying to get that point across to the officers in the command as their commanding officer. And there was one young lieutenant in particular. He got there, and this was before he was promoted to captain, and I just kept letting him know, trying to reinforce that, hey, here's the deal. You're going to check in, and I'm not trying to totally control these guys' lives, but I'm trying to make sure that they understand that their job is more important than their personal life. And this gentleman wanted to have a nice family situation that's got some land, and he wanted to live about 40 minutes away on the North Carolina border. And I just said, hey, here's the deal. This job is going to require an immense amount of time.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to commit everything you've got. And if you want to have recreational sports and a lot of free time, downtime, and it's and if you can kind of talk on that, sort of like what Winston Churchill had said is, you are being developed when you're in that command, and time is very finite and limited. Mm-hmm. But when you go down range, and how we would train you through those mission rehearsal exercises, we'd have a lot of role players creating a chaotic situation. So they're trying to overwhelm you with, scenarios that there's often in some of these scenarios, there's no right answer, but we're trying to test your decision making. And if you have not spent the time preparing ahead of time, and for some of those listeners that may be in business, that
exactly.
If you're kind of mentally aloof, or if you're checking in on social media and doing things other than your job, that can cost the endeavors that you've been entrusted in the Marine Corps, for you were given the sons of America to take down range, and it could cost their lives. I mean, FAST is, if you were to deploy under a contingency, it's never going to be a good situation. As we saw with the Benghazi situation, there was 400 communications ahead of time that, I mean, our command knew that there was a situation going in duress. We had a platoon put on alert, who was already forward staged in theater, and there was just a lack of decision at the highest levels of the Department of State and Department of Defense on taking action, because they didn't want it to appear that there's something going on. They really, with Libya, they wanted to make it seem like peace had broken out all over northern Africa. Look at what a lot of these are tied into not just politics but presidential politics of trying to gerrymander and campaign that, like, we're doing this great job and we don't need military there. I mean, but it was the complete opposite. We had a meltdown that cost American lives, that one we had known about. I mean, if Marines, we had that platoon on the ground the next day after Benghazi. I mean, it could have been before. Yeah. But, if a Marine on the ground and a young infantryman knew that it wasn't because of a video, right, you guarantee that the regional security officer at the embassy, the guy in charge of all the security, as well as other people at the embassy, to include all the way up to the next in charge for the ambassador when he perished, and then all the way up to the Secretary of State. I mean, they knew that it wasn't some video, but there was a cover up. And, so what I say and what I want to ask you is, your job, whether it's a platoon commander preparing yourself, or if it's like a Secretary of State, that these things can happen. And if you're not, one, mentally prepared that these are likely courses of action, and two, that you have the courage to stand up and say, stop. We cannot do this because it's unethical. And that's what happened in Benghazi is, we had 4 Americans lose their life because people were not making decisions. The sound, moral, ethical decisions that they needed to keep Americans' lives safe. And when you don't, and that's your job. We were in this unit where, mistakes like that cost lives. So talk a little bit about those two things, about preparing yourself both tactically and with like your moral fitness to make sure that you are going through these, Army Special Forces, not that I've never gone through that training, but in the Army Special Forces, they have their Robin Sage phase where they put them through these moral dilemmas. And it's similar to some of the things we tested during your mission rehearsal exercise, trying to test you to your limit. Talk a little bit about that moral as well as tactical stress. So
it comes down to, all of that. I think, I've obviously never been high up in politics or anything, but I think whether it's business or military or government, keeping the most important thing. Yes. And keeping a clear vision of what is my role and responsibility? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And using that to guide you. And that can be in life. I mean, I bet if we walked outside right now and asked 10 people, what's your purpose in life? They'd give you a dumb look. They wouldn't know. And when you don't know what your purpose is, how easy is it to get off the rails? So like a ship that doesn't have a destination, it's just going to get carried on by the tides. And we see that a lot in our personal lives. We see it on the news. People that get carried along by the tides of popular opinion, I think, once you get into politics, whatever is socially acceptable, those sorts of things. But having a clear vision of, this is my responsibility, this is where I'm headed, here's what can happen along the way, and then being prepared for those as best you can. In personal finances, having an emergency fund. Guess what? Cars break down, people get sick, jobs get lost. And if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you are not prepared for that. And it's now a crisis. Versus if you think forward thinking, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Well, I could get laid off and my car could break down. All right, what would I do if that happened? And at least having a plan for that is going to make it, instead of a crisis, it'll be an annoyance, because you have a plan and you just have to execute that plan. So
and
keeping that vision,
those resources to have and to have the discipline set aside those resources.
Yeah.
So you finished your time in the Marine Corps, and you'd done pretty much what you wanted to do. You led Marines at the tactical level almost as long as you could. After that, they were going to send you to a school or something that took you away from Marines.
Yep.
And that is the standard career progression for a Marine officer. And that's,
if I wanted to advance, I would have to execute that. Go to a school, a command school. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that is good for some Marines, because often, unlike the choice he made to go to a unit like FAST, where he's still in a tactical fight, making those decisions, leading Marines. Most Marine officers have been, for 3 years, they've been in a non-operational assignment, what we call a B billet, or it's not your normal A assignment where you're leading Marines. So they've been doing that for 3 years. And sometimes some of these schools can kind of tune people back into, okay, you're about ready to go back out into the operational forces. So they get a year to, get reoriented back on, they're about ready to go lead Marines in an operational role. So, but you did what you wanted to do in the Marines. There were some things that you decided you wanted to pursue in the private sector. And can you talk about those and lead us into, I know you're involved in a charity, what led your heart in that direction? So
my departure from the Marine Corps, it was really, I couldn't, due to call it trauma, call it injury, I couldn't continue anymore. At the last, you had already departed the unit, but towards the end, I just was not functioning at the level that I wanted to function anymore. And it got down to the fact where I didn't trust myself to lead Marines anymore. I felt about 30% across the board, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And I was seeing my performance decline steadily, especially after my Afghan deployment. And so I knew that I was not in a sustainable occupation to do. And plus, I felt a greater call to something else, almost that the Marine Corps was not able to fill that either. So separated from the Marine Corps, got married a week after I left the Marine Corps.
Wow.
I had 90 days of terminal leave, so I had 90 days of vacation saved up. So got married, and my wife and I, we traveled around the world, space available.
Right.
We can get a hop a flight, military flight.
Opportunity lift.
Yeah. So we traveled around Europe, and it was not as pleasant as you would expect, because I came straight from a very intense operational tempo for the past 7-8 years. And then I couldn't just flip that switch off.
Yes.
I always had to keep myself occupied, had a lot of anxiety, and I had a lot of things bubbling under the surface that I've been able to kind of drown out with being so focused on work. People used to joke that you and I had some sort of competition to see who could stay later at the office.
But there was always things to do. It wasn't a competition. It was, there's a lot of important, people are going, I think in that command time there, there's just platoons coming and going. It's no unit really like that.
But what I quickly learned was that the things that made me successful inside the Marine Corps were not going to make me successful inside of marriage.
Yes.
That put your head down and just keep moving forward and things like that. Working 20 hours a day was not sustainable. So I had this choice now. What do I do? And I've always kind of had a entrepreneurial mind. Looking for opportunities, and I saw opportunities inside the photography space, where a lot of my friends were getting married, and just I heard horror story after horror story about wedding photos and terrible wedding photographers, and people spend a lot of money on that,
yes.
And for them to not be happy, there's a market there. So
Right.
I went into that space and started a media company that was photography, videography, and in the midst of that, I needed a website. And working with web designers, I personally had the same experience of I couldn't find anything satisfactory.
Yes.
Just poor business skills. So I taught myself how to build websites and started doing that for other businesses. And then in the course of interacting with other business owners, sometimes people would call me for a website, and I'd get to talking to them and realize you don't need a website. You need to get these things aligned in your business.
Yes.
And a website is just going to be piling bricks into a boat that has a hole in it. You got to patch these holes. So that led me into business solutions and mentoring business leaders. And that's a space where I really could take what the Marine Corps had taught me and apply that in efficiency, discipline, marketing. Everything really came full circle there. But in the course of all of this, having just a tremendous struggle with kind of emotional stability, felt very numb, and some of that's to be expected, when you're traveling around the world and you're deploying to combat zones, you're not going to find that level of adrenaline anywhere else.
Right.
And so, I was thinking, what's going on? And that led me to a place called Mighty Oaks. It's a veterans organization that was started by Chad Robichaux, Force Recon Marine, and it's all veteran. All the instructors are alumni, and it was a program that definitely impacted my life profoundly as a student. And then I've had the opportunity to return again and again as a team leader and an instructor, and has really kind of shaped who I am now. Absolutely.
And that's important, not only for young, war fighters, the guys that are at that point of friction, but often in the military, especially over a career. And you mentioned a little bit when we were breaking some bread. There's some a lot of senior enlisted that go there in an effort to take care of their Marine or soldiers. As a program that the military can send folks there, and they realize themselves, and that's something like you'd mentioned that over time, you started to notice that hey, I'm having some of my mental and physical capabilities degrade, and you're not at your 100%, and as a leader, you feel sometimes you have to keep going on and keep this mass and keep it all in, and one of the words you'd mentioned is you were emotionally numb. And I remember after getting out of the Marine Corps, because as a leader, you can't show that
right
that soft side emotion. You can show the emotion as like you're a fierce, killer.
This cold weather doesn't bother me. This, and all that.
But especially going into combat and seeing some of those things and being stoic, it is important later on that you kind of recalibrate those gauges, because a phrase that somebody had mentioned to me and I never even heard of it before was emotional regulation. And they're like, once you're off that treadmill and you stop running at 100 miles an hour, you realize like some things will hit you, and you can just see like the innocence of a young child and just realize like wow, that's what I'm fighting for. And sometimes some guys are having a hard time controlling their emotions because I'm not a doctor or psychologist, but it's very difficult for people to handle some things that they just haven't dealt with for so long.
And we're talking about this also, that a lot of these things don't stem from the military. It comes from their whole life prior to the military. Trauma experienced as a child, as a teenager. We say at Mighty Oaks that trauma is not a combat issue. Veterans do not have a monopoly on trauma or post-traumatic stress.
Yes.
That's a life issue.
Right.
And the analogy we use is that we're wearing this pack, and as we go through life and we experience trauma, setback, pain, we kind of pack that away.
Right.
And in a combat situation, that's a very necessary skill to have. You see someone get tragically and horrifically wounded. that's important, but you've got to be able to shut that out and focus on the mission as well,
Yes.
or other people can get hurt and wounded. However, inside of normal life, because combat is not a normal situation,
Yes.
and the skills and tools necessary to survive in that theater are not something that you should necessarily have, sitting around the dinner table with your wife and kids. And so talking about beginning to take some of those things out of the pack and deal with them, because like a physical wound, if one has a physical wound, let's say I blow out my knee, well, I can take medication to numb that knee. I can get injections to numb that knee, but that knee is not going to get any better.
Right.
I'm just numbing the pain, and pain is an indicator that something's wrong.
Right.
And
if you keep hitting the override,
yep,
it's going to continue
do more
to
damage,
degrade that,
Yep.
and then you're going to be dealing with a much larger
Yep.
problem.
So do the hard work of cutting open that injury, and this has to be done, by individuals who have some skill.
Right.
We were talking about isolation. I can't isolate and try to self-medicate, because that doesn't go well either. We see that with addictions, with
Yes.
behaviors that are self-destructive. There has to be that authenticity, and you said it at the beginning of your program, the naked truth. There's a sense of vulnerability being naked emotionally, and especially for male culture and military male culture, emotional vulnerability is nowhere in that packing list. Yeah.
In one of the podcasts we just talked about earlier, a few sessions ago, was we went to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot and spoke to the drill instructors and talked about, like, as far as like an organizational transformation, how the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps is like many of those services in this regard, but I think the Marine Corps does it the best. They are totally transforming. I mean, from the minute that bus opens its door and a drill instructor goes on there and starts yelling.
Yeah.
I mean, they are covered in the line in a formation. They're read, the various articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, what they can and cannot do. They're gone in there, and they immediately dump all their worldly possessions out on a table, and they don't see them for 3 months. They get their head shaved, and they are basically a new person. And that's kind of, very important that, just like the Marine Corps programmed these guys for 12 weeks, and at the end of the Marine Corps, they give you 5 days to kind of learn how to write a resume and go out and get a job. But, it is very important that, professionals get in to the, get in contact with the Marines, and that the Marines themselves volunteer and say, hey, this is what I want. Because a lot of it, like you talked about in the Marine Corps, you always want to be there. You don't want to let your buddy down, and trying to be vulnerable and saying, hey, I need this help. This is important to me. It's very difficult, and it's probably the most important step that person realizes, like, hey, I'm going to kind of get to the naked truth. I'm going to let my guard down and kind of go open kimono here and say, I need some help.
Right.
And you've seen that at Mighty Oaks. Some guys, go through there and transition their emotions, haven't you?
So, and the model we use at Mighty Oaks is we don't ask the students to do anything that we don't do ourselves.
Yes.
So when they get there, we have 4 locations around the United States. The gentlemen come for a week. We have a women's program as well, but they follow a different curriculum. The men come. They're very nice places, great food. We create a very comfortable environment. But one of the first things that they experience is one of the instructors sharing our story from childhood through the military, failures, traumas, abuses, things that we've suffered with and struggled through, and we're in essence being authentic with them, and creating that space where they can be authentic with us. And absolutely, I've seen gentlemen come there that are carrying things in their pack that they said they would never share with anyone, and then they end up sharing that with the others there, and I've seen lives changed, lives saved, it's really a tremendous program.
And it's also a Christian faith-based,
Yep.
Organization. It's charity that people can donate to.
Yep.
But a lot of folks, I realize that in this day and age, there are certain key talking points that from the media and various people. I fully understand it's highly organized and funded. That there are certain people out there that are the elite of Americans who have accumulated billions of dollars, and many of these people feel that they can just do it all themselves. And I'm here to tell you that that's very dangerous. And maybe there are examples of people that have had success and they feel they've largely done it on their own. For every one of those, there's millions that have come to that realization that this problem is bigger than themselves, that they're going to be crushed under the weight of, they made some decisions, some of them didn't go right, and it's hurt or harmed themselves and their families. And to me, that's one thing I realized, the only thing that is truly effective, if you've got some minor, obstacle that you have to clear, yeah, you can do that on your own most often. But when it's like a crucible in life that, it's far larger than yourself and your network, that's when you have to rely on something bigger than yourself. And God is the only one that's really going to come to your rescue when you're in dire straits. And sometimes it takes people to have to bottom out to realize, like, hey, or they just continue to go on and operate. Like you said, you were at like 30%, and that's not a way to really live your life productively. You're made to live life abundantly. And unless you understand that, this world was designed by a creator,
exactly,
a God that created the world and the people in the world, and who loves and cares about us. That's where every single day, not just when I was in the Marines as a business owner, doing things after the Marines. There are a lot of things that I cannot control, like in the Marines, and it involves safety, risk, not just financial risk, risk of life, and it's something that I've had to continue to rely on, even more so than working as an employee in a regular business.
Yep. And we talked earlier about vision, about you've got to have that vision that is straight and true.
Yes.
And I think that that is a relationship with Jesus Christ and God's will as revealed through the Bible. That is that straight and true path that either indicates that we are or we aren't, and we can kind of forecast. We talk about making a plan and executing that plan to influence the future. That allows us to do that as well, and even to the point you talked about, we have been created. We talk about that with regards to post-traumatic stress. Mighty Oaks, we don't call it a disorder. What we say is that it is actually the individual's brain responding the way it was created to respond. So I'll use a personal example. I was at Mighty Oaks, and we were out doing horseback riding, and so it's hot. I'm smelling livestock. I'm walking down a dirt path because I'm going to go out and shoot some video of these guys riding. And so I'm walking down this dirt path, and I see 3 rocks stacked on top of each other. So in a combat theater, that's an indicator that there's an IED in the area. It's a indicator that the enemy uses to let the locals know to stay out. So it's hot, it's dusty, I smell livestock, and I see 3 rocks. My brain can't tell the difference. It has recorded all this historical data that tells me that this is a dangerous situation. Yes. And that is my brain trying to keep me alive. Yes. It's actually my brain doing what it's supposed to do. Now, I'm in Southern California and that threat isn't there. I have to use my cognitive process to say, okay. But understanding that there's not something wrong with me, there's not something broken with me, I'm not, some poor veteran that needs to be pitied. No, I'm a fully functioning, healthy human being with a brain that wants to keep me safe. Yes. And that plays out not just for veterans, but for every single individual, because we've all experienced some sort of trauma and have recorded that information into our brain to help us survive. And so understanding ourselves in the context of we have been created to operate in a certain way gives us that vision to know what path we should be on and navigate those times when there are things outside of our control, to know what's the next step to take.
Now, at Mighty Oaks, this is a very interesting organization because there's several organizations I've come in contact with that have good intentions, but this is a 5-day resident program where the veteran who has undergone this, and it's an all-male program. It's personnel have been assessed. They have PTSD.
So it's open to active military, veteran military, and first responders. There is an application process, and there is a sort of triage of certain individuals need to get there like right now.
Yes.
But it's open to any military, veteran, first responders. There is a program for females as well. I'm not a part of that program, obviously, because I'm not a female. So I can speak to the Men's Legacy program. But they do have to provide, personal history data, things like that as well.
Yes.
Yeah. But they do not have to be a combat vet. They do not have to believe they have PTSD or have some sort of diagnosis. Okay. It's open to any of those that I stated before. Yeah.
And it's really because of the benevolence of not just volunteers that go and provide their time, but also people who have financially supported it, such as the founder. And these resources, truly, provide the backdrop that these guys can feel comfortable, relax, and you kind of feel protected. Not that it's not in a survival setting where they're being tested again.
No,
they're really being brought into the fold and accepted. How important is that whole network with the public providing support in form of donations and the different the founder.
So the founder is Chad Robichaud, Force Recon Marine, who life kind of disintegrated due to PTSD and decisions that he was making as a result of that.
Yes.
That's another thing we talk about, that you don't get a pass because you've experienced trauma. You're still responsible for your decisions. And he went through a year-long program that changed his life. They condensed it down into an intense week program. So it's no cost to the attendees. The travel arrangements are all provided for. When we fly into the airport, it is local civilians that pick us up and drive us to whichever property it is that we're on. They spare no expense. The facility that is in San Luis Obispo, California, was built on a ranch for the program specifically, and the gentleman that did that spared no expense. And they have a chef. So there's a lot of people around the nation that want to say thank you to veterans and give back. And there's a lot of programs that, people can go fish, or they can go hike, or they can go on a trip, which is great. And it's a great way for them to say thank you. We say we're not one of those programs. We're not a hug a vet program. We're a poke a vet in the chest program. And we will, challenge them, and we want them to not just survive, but we want them to thrive, and not just for their own benefit, but it's so that they can turn around and help someone else. That's really how it started. Chad fell down. Someone helped him get up. He turned around, found someone else that needed to get up, and we've just been doing that for years.
A buddy aid.
Yep.
Now, for those listening that are not watching the banner on the bottom because they're not watching the YouTube video, but just listening on the audio, what is if you can state the name of the website they can go to and check out the information and how to donate?
If they go to mightyoaksprograms.org, mightyoaksprograms.org, that's the website. There's a online application there as well. So if you have if you are a service member or a first responder that's interested in it, or you have a friend or family member, you can also go to YouTube and YouTube Chad Robichaud's I Am Second video. That's a good kind of gives a short story of.
How do you spell
of him.
Robichaux?
Oh gosh, it's Robichaux.
Okay.
Yeah, Robichaux, AUX at the end.
And describe some of the like a high level overview of some of the events that they do.
Yeah. So there'll be a collective time together where they get a period of instruction. Some of the items that we cover are character, discipline, money and possessions, margin, marriage, legacy, purity, our common enemy. And then after each period of instruction, we'll have a small team breakout. So they're in the same 4 or 5 man team all week, and where we discuss the content, apply it to our lives, and kind of that peer-to-peer group. And then there's also recreational activities. They ride quads, ride horses, great food. And so that's kind of how the week goes. And then probably the most profound, and it's really what keeps me coming back, is these gentlemen all get the opportunity to share their story. So all throughout the week, they're hearing the instructors' stories. Before I teach a class, I'm talking about my life, how, what I'm about to teach showed up in my life, either through my failures or applying it to my life made a change. But then they get an opportunity to take off that pack, that proverbial pack that has all that past history, and start unpacking it. And what that does is it does a couple things. One, there's things in your story that are going to speak to my story, and there's things in my story that are going to speak to your story, and it shows that we're not alone. And number two, sometimes when we isolate ourselves and we live in between our ears, things may make sense, but when we try to articulate it to someone else, we realize it doesn't make sense. Right. So this narrative that we've been playing over and over in our head, as we isolate ourselves, when we bring that out verbally, we realize that, that actually doesn't make sense. And it helps us kind of package and process what's going on. And then also, for the gentlemen that have family members, the first time they share their story, some of these guys, this is the first time they've talked about a combat trauma or abuse that happened as a child, something like that. It gives them a safe environment to share that. Yes. So that when they go back home and they need to tell their wife or their kids, they've already processed through it, unpacked it, gone through the process, talked about it, and they kind of have control over it now, and they can put it in terms that a child can understand, or articulate it to their wives in a way that they can be understood. Yeah. So that's a very powerful night when they get to share their story. Yeah.
It's very important. I know there's a lot of listeners that have gone through very challenging times in their lives, and there's some people that are listening to this or likely have thought of taking their own life. Yep. And one of those first steps is realizing that you do need some help and that you want to go and get some help. Without that, and these, many people are not at a point of destitution, and maybe they are very successful, but they're just empty inside, and they just realize, like, I am not doing, like what you said, what is your mission in life? Right. There's things that you can do that are good, and there's things that you are put on this earth and given talents to do that are the best, that you were created for. Like, again, if say, God created us, and, Jesus said in the Bible, there's people, that said, hey, let me go bury my father, and, God created us to do something very important, and that is, eternal. And if we want to focus on stuff in the past or the present, let me resolve this right now, we need to be able to do things that are future focused, right, and that involve, our faith to be able to go out and understand that, like, God created us and He wants us to move and advance towards Him, for Him. And if we can't do that, because, most of society today, they're not going to talk about faith, especially not on a podcast. Right. It's just too vulnerable. It's not popular. But that's really the only thing that's going to be able to help you. And, like I mentioned when we were having lunch earlier, I'm very thankful, that things happened, in a very opposite way of what I thought after I retired from the Marine Corps. Never thought they would have, came this direction. But you do need help beyond just yourself to make it in today's day and age.
Right. Yeah.
And,
back to that idea of if I've blown out my knee, I can't fix that myself.
Right.
I can medicate that myself, but that's not going to make it any better.
Yes.
I need an outside agency with the skill and the knowledge to put that back together. And, on the level of faith that you're talking about, who better to put me back together than the one who created me,
right,
and who has the picture. I know how you're supposed to be operating, and by simply aligning my life with his plan, I'm going to be operating in that capacity, and also through others that have walked that road. We, as the instructors, we say, we're not standing up there as doctors or psychiatrists. We're just kind of that senior lance corporal who's one step ahead.
Yes.
Meaning a year ago I was a student, and now I've gone back as an instructor. I'm just one step ahead. Right. That can help them, that next step down the road. So not isolating ourselves is huge. And you talked about it earlier about, I think in law enforcement, in the military, there's a shame around acknowledging that you can't do something.
Right.
There's a shame around saying that you need help, and that's usually the biggest hurdle, to get over. And sometimes, the military can't offer that because that's not their mission. The military's mission is not, personal growth and development. It's to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. But there are people that can provide that help. So one thing we say is, if what you're doing isn't working, why not try something different?
Yes.
And so sometimes in business, in the military, and personal life, we do the same thing over and over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And when that result isn't coming, we gotta try something different.
Yes.
Yeah.
You talked about putting rocks in your pack and stacking things that eventually build up. And one of the earlier podcasts, we were talking on the Revolutionary War about one of our founding fathers, great man of faith, General George Washington. And he was a leader in a very desperate time for America. The winter of 1777. America was just declared our independence, and Britain had just arrived on our shore and was fighting us to, they were hopefully going to be bringing us back into order, which thank God it didn't happen that way. So, but, it was dire straits as Washington moved into Valley Forge, but, he had a love for his fellow soldiers, and that's what's so important. And that's what I see at Mighty Oaks is, there was times when I was doing that research, many things I read about General Washington. He saw the suffering of his men, and just like the example that Jesus had, he truly loved those to the point where, it says, like in Mark, he didn't come to serve, but he didn't come to be served, but to serve.
He came to serve, yeah.
And George Washington, he at times, because he was a leader, he could not face, because he did, become physically emotional when he saw the suffering and dying of many of his soldiers. And being infantry officers and serving in both in combat and in training, when the conditions, the environment is very arduous and you're suffering and you're partaking in that, and you see a young Marine out there, he's being pushed to his mental max. And I would say it is very critical that if you're going to be an effective leader, that you must love your men. And then here's a way that even Travis is giving back through the Mighty Oaks program. He's not financially benefiting from this. He's volunteering because he knows the importance of people making their lives whole. This is a program it's life changing. It's taking people that have operated at very high levels, that have put a lot of stuff, like you said, in their pack, that have chased after some adrenaline, and then all of a sudden, once they separate from the service like he did, some of that network, which kind of helped it, keep things together. In certain situations, if that person goes back and kind of isolates him or herself away from people that they had as basically a family. They had trusted very closely, and then that's gone. I'm not a social scientist or saying I'm a psychologist and doing any kind of research, but there are reasons why veteran suicide is very high, and you do have to get plugged in. So those of you that are going through programs like this and you're a veteran, you can reach out to the Mighty Oaks. Those of you who are not veterans, there are many other organizations through your local church and many other organizations that are there to help you. And the first step is recognizing that you can't not do this on your own. You've made decisions that have brought you to a point where you're unsatisfied, unfulfilled, and possibly even destitute. And that's where God can really change your life and do things that you have not been able to do. So, but thank you for that. And I did want to talk about, and we'll segue into our next topic of something that happened earlier in your life with rodeo. And now, again, we spoke about earlier, rodeo is something that was the original American sport, and it's something that those cowboys did to entertain themselves. And now we have kind of a modern day rodeo, and we're going to take a look real quick at a few different of these sports. This right here, which is the viewers can see at some of these rodeos. This is trick riding. Some of these gals, obviously, this wasn't going on in early days of cowboy rodeo, but they're doing something very acrobatic and athletic, very dangerous, and it takes a lot of time and strength. And when you were living and working on a farm, how much time those that were involved in rodeo, they didn't just get up on the horse and do something like that.
Right.
How hard and the dedication is required to do something like, whether you're a guy or a girl doing some trick riding like that. Well,
they're professional athletes, and the interesting thing about rodeo is there's two professional athletes right there. There's the young lady doing the tricks, and then there's the horse. The horses are highly trained as well. That's not just some horse that she grabbed this morning before she did that.
She's worked with that horse.
So, like any professional athlete, it's a full-time job. And so something like this, it's a showing off skill, skill of the horse, skill of the rider. And I can remember being, a kid, and we wouldn't do stuff to that degree hanging off the side of a horse, but, we would just like even think of a kid with a bicycle, taking it off a jump, things like that. That's really kind of what you're looking at here is someone showing skill and aptitude with their animal. Now that she does that probably much better than anyone else I know could, but
But it's something they're doing every day, 7 days a week, hours a day, and they're getting injured, falling off horses, running, and the horse can get injured. And now here,
mutton busting.
Mutton busting is something that a lot of young folks grew up in. You're riding a sheep, and it is a lot of fun getting young kids some confidence. Seeing how long they can ride on that sheep and overcoming some fear.
Exactly.
But that's something that, in the days here in mid-America, a lot of these flyover states or some of these rural states that, kids can have some fun and learn about animals before they get on a bronco or a bull. And they get some trophies and some recognition. And but it's a good way for, the family to, get a kid situated with an animal and overcome some fear.
Physical courage. Did mutton busting. We actually had sheep for a few years. So, would go out and ride them. And I remember being a little guy and being scared, to be...
Right.
Now, looking at it now, that doesn't look like there's anything to be scared of. We definitely didn't wear helmets when I did it. But for a little guy, that's scary, especially if it's not something they do every day. Plus, they want to grow up and be like, their dad who might ride bulls or horses, and this is a kind of a fun way to mimic them.
And those kids they actually can get hurt. When I was at the rodeo and I was seeing they were kind of getting those sheep that the young boys would ride, they're getting them all riled up. I think they may have wanted a woman or a young girl to ride it to win, because the ones the girls were on a little docile. Now this is riding a bronco,
saddle
bareback.
Bronc, it's bareback.
Describe a little bit about these cowboys and how they're wearing some of that protective gear. And and how they get injured fairly easily.
Yep. So they're wearing Kevlar vests, and I think those came around in the 80s when there was some fatal injuries. I mean, these are fatal sports. People, you get stepped on by, a 1,500-pound horse.
Now look at it around his neck. He's got a big collar.
So with what they're doing, just the whiplash of that can be pretty severe. So that collar keeps their head from being snapped back against their shoulders there.
Having some severe neck injuries.
And then another thing to notice is the pickup men. Oh, that looks like a younger kid. Yeah, that's just a little guy there. It's supposed to be a junior.
And they learn. Well, they have all ages.
Yeah.
And, they learn when they're young boys.
They even have miniature bull riding, where it's a genetically miniature bull and little kids ride them. Yeah, that's another little guy.
So you got crushed there.
Yep. Yeah, you can get severely hurt. He's in a world of pain right now. But so that Kevlar vest kind of protects their internal organs. The biggest thing you have to worry about is a rib getting broke and puncturing your heart, puncturing your lungs, which is anytime there's a fatal injury, it's either severe head trauma or an internal organ's gotten crushed. Here you've got barrel racing. So this is, probably spawned from who has the fastest horse.
Yes.
And there's some agility.
Yes.
Agility in there too of sharp turns and
nowadays this is pretty much a female sport.
Yep. Yeah, it's a female sport.
Now they knock a barrel down.
5 minutes. Yeah, so she's got 10 seconds extra added onto her time for knocking the barrel over. So various levels of skill. Yeah. Yeah, some of those horses are very, very expensive horses. They're professional athletes. They're bred for that. They're trained for that. And I've even been to a rodeo where one of the bucking horses, one of the saddle bronc horses, used to be a barrel racing horse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but made an exceptional bucking horse.
Yeah. I remember going to the rodeo. This gal, I think she said she was 72 and she was doing barrel racing like that. So, something like this, it requires a lot of skill and agility, but some of these sports they can do a little bit later.
These your rough stock events are the saddle bronc, bareback, and bull riding. Those are young man games. Steer wrestling too, to a certain degree. But your ropers, your team ropers, calf ropers, not so much. But team ropers can rope, into the later years.
Yes.
Yeah. Then everybody's favorite event, bull riding, and this is more just a test of skill and toughness. There's no practical reason to ride a bull. I think, I knew a Marine I had a Marine who was also a bull rider. He's passed away now, but I said, what do you think takes less brains, to be a Marine or to be a bull rider? And he says, I think being a bull rider takes a certain type of crazy.
Yeah, it definitely does. And you don't see any old bull riders.
No, you don't.
Sort of like the Marines. It's a young man's game.
Exactly, yeah.
You can't do it, if you're doing it very often and frequently, you're not going to be doing it very long.
Yeah.
As in, not into your 30s.
Yeah. I mean, just, there's no pickup men for these. They know they're going to hit the ground and that bull's usually going to come after them. But there's a lot of horns and hooves flying around.
Yes.
Land on their head. A lot of neck injuries.
Yes.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about how the team with those clowns roll?
So there's 3 bullfighters, and they try to stay in a consistent triangle around the bull so that their job is to get the bull's attention and keep him distracted so the cowboy can get away. Or at times, the cowboy's hand will get caught in their rope if they come off the wrong way. And so then their hand is still attached to that bull as he's flying around in circles, and those bullfighters have to just kind of sacrifice their bodies to get in there to rescue that cowboy.
And we got some steer wrestling here. Or is that team roping?
Nope, this is steer wrestling. Or no, okay, so that's calf roping. That other one was steer wrestling. So this is a very practical sport. That guys on the ranch still do this today. If a calf needs doctored,
now if you had a daughter, you wouldn't let your daughter go out with a man that had hands that fast, would you?
Well, I don't know about that. He
He's
seems
pretty
to
quick.
do it pretty good, yeah. So at this point, if he's on the range, now that calf is going to be in a position where he can do whatever he needs to do to it.
I'm not positive what my
so
time
this
was. You can't hear back
is a
here,
barrel
but I
rider.
think I had a nice.
Oh, is this the 72-year-old barrel racer?
How long have you been barrel riding?
I'm 72 years old, and
Yes.
I've been doing it pretty much all my life.
Wow.
So,
You probably had a couple of falls and some injuries, haven't you?
a lot.
Yes.
Off the horse.
No, I've been real fortunate. God's blessed me to bring me back.
What's your horse's name?
BB French Moonbug,
Okay. Wow.
or Opie.
Opie.
One thing I noticed is
This is my one ride this weekend, and then we may go up to Lincoln to another thing, but
they have such
this is the only run we have
good
here.
patriotism and such polite
Yeah.
manners.
Yeah.
Every cowboy and cowgirl.
Yeah, you still have that.
So what brings you here to American Royal Rodeo?
My dad is competing here, and we're gonna see how good he does.
Okay, what's he competing in?
Team roping and calf roping.
Okay, so he's out there right now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Pressure's on for him.
Yes, sir.
You can be doing it yourself one of these days?
In about 4 years, yes, sir.
Okay. You're gonna be competing in the youth rodeo?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is your rope here, I see.
Yes, sir.
Alrighty. Where are you from?
Texas, Decatur, Texas.
Decatur, Texas. How long you been riding?
Since I was 1 year old.
Since you were 1 year old?
Yep.
Alright. We hope to see you out here in a few years. 4 years.
Yes, sir. I do too.
Alrighty. Best luck to your father.
He's fired up.
Alright. Alright, so ready to be a cowboy.
Clint Summers. I'm from Lake City, Florida.
Okay. What brings you all the way up here to Kansas City?
I was just rodeoing. We do it year round. And this is one of the last rodeos of the year.
So they can make some big money in rodeo.
come up
Oh,
here.
yeah.
You competed in American Royal before, I take it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
How long have you been riding for?
Oh, my whole life. Yes, sir.
What you're doing team roping, what else you competed in the rodeo on?
Oh, I just team rope most of the time. I rope calves every now and then, but pretty much just team rope.
Okay. How much time do you spend training?
Oh, pretty much every day of the week. We're doing something that goes towards, the rodeoing.
And how much time each day?
Pretty much, we get up and we eat and then we get at it. Pretty much spend all day, probably 4 to 5 hours we're out there doing something.
Wow.
It's amazing that
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
you're outdoors all year round.
Win something in a Saturday night.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. What's your name and where are you from?
I'm Casey Harbin. I'm from Maysville, Missouri.
You're from Maysville, but your name's Casey.
Yes.
Is this your first time riding here in the American Royal?
No. I have been here through the youth rodeo, and I've been at the pro rodeo 4 times.
Okay. How did you ride today?
Not very well. I hit the second barrel, so it could have gone a lot better.
Oh, I heard somebody hit all 3 barrels and fell. Just kidding.
You're supposed to buy pizza if you hit all 3 barrels for everybody else.
Oh, okay. How long have you been riding?
Since I was 7 years old.
This is your 7 years old.
Yep.
For about 10 years.
I'm 25 almost. So a little while.
You excited to ride this weekend?
So have you
Yes.
seen more girls get into
This
rodeo
is Mara's
than
first real weekend back, so we're
Back
pretty
in the day?
excited.
I think it's more
What type of injuries have you had?
the female events have stayed pretty consistently possible.
Lacerated my speech and broken my leg.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Popular.
It hasn't stopped you from
I've seen some team roping with some
Thankfully, I haven't
females.
got
Yeah, I've seen even on the pro circuit, I've seen more females in team roping. You used to never see
She's
them, but
14 years
yeah.
old, and
Yep,
she's a rock
that's
star.
and
Thank you very
really
much.
they can compete in any of the events.
Thank you very much.
You know,
Good luck.
I don't know many women that would get on the back of a bull.
Right.
They've been blessed with more intelligence than some men.
What are you all doing out here today?
We're here for the team roping, the American Royal, from Creston, Oklahoma. His name's Austin Rogers. Happy to be here.
Where's your partner at?
He's out back warming up. Yep, getting ready.
He's the one that's going to jump on the...
He's gonna head the steer, yes sir. He's gonna get out the barrier, head the steer, and then I'm gonna do my best to catch 2 feet.
How long have you been team roping for?
About 10 years.
About 10 years.
Yes sir.
And is this your first time up here in American Royal?
I've came here about 5 years ago, and I hadn't been back, and I'm glad to be back.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys are looking forward to riding this Friday and Saturday, aren't you?
Yep. I'm ready to get after him, hopefully take home a little dough.
Yeah, hope so. Now, what type of injuries you had since you've been riding?
I've got bucked off and broke some leg and broke a kneecap before.
Broken kneecap?
Yeah, I fractured a back, but nothing too bad.
Still riding.
Yep.
What what kind of procedures have you had to keep you riding?
Just mainly just getting healed back up. You know, I've had I shattered a foot, and I just had to lay up all winter and get healed up. And when I broke my back, pretty much same thing. Just lay up, and watch TV till I get healed up. No,
It's amazing how the
thankfully
Cowboys
nothing.
they take
No
a
big
serious
surgeries
injury
or
and they
anything
don't,
like that.
make a big event out of it.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck to you.
Hey, appreciate
Yeah,
it.
that Western toughness.
So we're here at the American Royal Rodeo in Kansas City, and what are you doing up here?
Steer wrestling.
Steer wrestling.
Yeah.
What's your name?
Justin Schaefer,
Where are you from, Justin?
Northeast Texas, Longview.
And you come all the way up here for
Yeah,
hopefully getting the big prize.
that's it.
Is your first time riding in the rodeo?
It is here. Yep.
Okay. So when somebody that doesn't know about the rodeo, they say, some derogatory phrase like we're offended to here in Mid-America, like quit acting like a bunch of cowboys.
Yeah.
You take offense to that, I take it.
Oh, maybe a little, but
Yeah.
this phrase been used for a long time.
Yeah. What's being a cowboy mean to you?
A lot. I mean, I know that some guys are just rodeo cowboys. When I'm home, I feel like being a cowboy is taking care of the livestock, the land, everything we got to do there. And then there's this life, the rodeo cowboy, going up down the road trying to compete, being an athlete. So I think there's athletes that are cowboys, and I think there's stay-at-home cowboys.
Yeah. So, and you're both?
Well, I feel like it, yeah.
Yes. You're working on the farm. How long from beginning to end did that take you each day normally?
Oh, well, I don't think you can set hours. Some days are real easy, and some days you go from daylight to dark. So, however many hours you got in a day. It depends on livestock. You can't put a time on.
Right. And how many hours a day you spend practicing your rodeo skills?
As much as I can. I try to get a workout in every day, an hour and a half, 2 hours workout, and then same thing. As far as myself, it don't take long, 30, 45 minutes to get my groundwork in and all that. But then to prepare my horses and all that kind of stuff is, I don't think you can set a time to it. They tell you when they're ready. So.
You probably had a few tough falls, haven't you?
Yeah, I've had a few wrecks. It comes with the nature of the sport.
Yeah. And what kind of injuries you've had over the years?
Nothing major for me in steer wrestling. Had a broke nose, ACL in the knee, had a shoulder tear up, but no major broken bones or surgeries.
Nothing major.
Yeah. You don't see any older rodeo riders competing?
I think some guys maybe lose the drive a little. The only old guys you see out here are still on the top, so I think guys that don't ever get there maybe lose the drive to go some, or just financially can't get there. And then on top of that, obviously it takes a toll on your body. Yeah. This especially our event, and I mean the bareback riding, the bull riding, all the rough stocks takes a big toll on a guy's body. You gotta try to stay as healthy as possible.
Yeah. So when you're getting out there about ready to compete, tell me about the butterflies in your stomach and how that makes you as far as an athlete.
I love it. I feel like some guys have a hard time with it, and I did for a long time. But now I've learned how to channel it, and I love that feeling now.
Do you miss it if you have to step away because of a slight injury for a while and you don't have that adrenaline?
Oh yeah. And I try to make it my living, so the only times I've had to step away is injuries. But yeah, you crave it. If you don't crave it when you're off, then you're probably not in the right event.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You bet.
Today we're here at the rodeo. We're going to be talking to a young lady. She's been riding for how long?
I've been riding since I was born, pretty much, and competing since I was 5.
Okay. And what's your name?
Allison Tuckwiller.
Okay, and Allison, where are you from?
I'm from Odessa, Missouri.
And have you been here at the American Royal before?
Yes, this is my 3rd year.
Okay. And how are you competing today?
I'm competing in barrel racing and also carrying the American flag.
Okay. Now, what do you think about folks that don't want to stand?
I think that the issue is a very, very big issue right now, but you won't see anybody taking a knee at rodeo. It's not a problem here.
That's right. Have you ever been thrown from a horse or had any serious injuries?
I haven't had any serious issues. I've had some crashes, but no injuries or anything.
Okay. And how long do you spend training each day?
I spend about a couple hours a day.
It's about a 7-day-a-week job?
Pretty much competing 3 days a weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then riding during the week.
Well, great. We wish you the best of luck today.
Thank you.
What's your horse's name?
Her name is She's Plenty Doc.
She's Plenty Doc?
Yes.
Okay, that's an unusual name. So you're taking really good care of her.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's a little bit of snapshot of what some of the rodeo riders' life is like. You know, a lot of time that they spend in dedicating themselves to doing that year round. You know, here in the middle of America, it's winters are like it is today, very windy and cool and wet, and then but they're out there, they're having to ride and take care of their animals, and that's how this part of the world, this part of our country was formed, and a legacy. I'm just glad that people are keeping that part of American society alive and everything. So, what was that like, seeing some of those people describe, rodeo life when you saw some of those?
Yeah, I mean that reminds me of my childhood. I grew up on a ranch, and a lot of those things I identified with. My earliest memories are from being on horseback. I remember riding before I remember walking, and you ask them about their horse racks, and it made me think about some of mine, and things like that. Even I had horse wrecks before I can even remember. My parents would tell me about it, and I still bear some of the scars and some of the effects of that too. So, it was funny when I got out of the Marine Corps, and you do all the post-medical stuff, and they ask about concussions. Well, I had to go all the way back to being like 2 and 3, and okay, I was bucked off a horse and knocked out this time, and bucked off a horse and knocked out that time, and bucked off a horse and knocked out that time. I think I had you're only allowed 3 concussions your whole lifetime. I think I had those by the time I was 5 years old. Yeah. It's
amazing how a lot of the rodeo riders treat that like it's nothing.
Yep.
It's if a kid in a regular neighborhood fell off a bike,
people run over and
they'd treat that like he needs to go to the hospital. And these people just, if they're truly injured and broken, they just rest up until they're healed. If they can get back on the horse, they're back on the horse immediately.
Yeah. You'll see rodeo cowboys competing with broken arms, with sometimes it's so severe that they can't, and then sometimes they're told this is too severe, you can't rodeo, but they'll still rodeo. Now, whether that's the right or wrong choice, I don't know, but that there is a certain toughness that comes with the military and the cowboy and things like that. I enjoy rodeo. It's kind of the environment that I was used to growing up in, around the ranch, and then county fair and going to the rodeos. And I'm out in Wyoming, so we have a lot of that. We have Cheyenne Frontier Days. That's a big one out there. So yeah, absolutely.
Good. Thank you for joining us again, Travis. I really appreciate making this stop when you came into Kansas today, and he's here to see some of his relatives. And really appreciate catching up again. And we will show on the video, and for those of you who have are not watching the video, it's mightyoaksprograms.org.
Yep.
And just please tune in there, check it out, see what they've been doing. If you are interested in volunteering, contact them and see what it takes to become a volunteer or to donate. So, but again, we wish you the best, Commandos. Thank you for tuning in and listen to a former platoon commander that we served together when he was a captain there on the East Coast, where we both left our time in the Marine Corps, and then he's doing some really good things for people that are changing their lives right now. So thank you again.
Glad to be here.
All
Good
right.
to see you.
Likewise.
To all my fellow grunts out there who in your youth felt it was your duty to protect us, I salute you. And thanks to the listeners of the Go Commando Show who labor on the farm, who are sweating on the construction site, putting forth your very best at the office. You are making a difference. Support the Go Commando Show in our pursuit of bringing you the highest quality professionals. Infiltrate the website at gocommandoshow.com, where you can view all of the podcasts and arm your team with incredible deals on health supplements, commando clothing, and equipment. Every time that you get a good deal, it supports the show. What deals? When you purchase anything from the website, Amazon, healthcare supplements, you're covering our six. And to the ladies on the team, when you outfit yourself in the super sexy threads from Naked Zebra, and yes, I'm talking about in a fuego, you are firing the sniper shot for our commandos. How else can you support? It's simple. You smash the follow and subscribe buttons on our social media. That is how you support us bringing great guests to talk about serious subjects, not the mainstream media's fake news. So thank you, and until our next show, stay in the attack and go Commando.